Hi, my name is Jo Sullivan, and I'm an instructor here at Central Penn College. Today, we're going to be looking at the presentation, Evaluating Digital Sources with the CRAAP Test, created by Dr. Melissa Whaler. First, take a moment to read through the objectives for this lesson. You may pause the video if you choose. Next, here are some quick tips on successful note-taking. Keep in mind you should always be writing down things that you see, hear, and read in these presentations. Okay. Now, before entering the writing phase of the research process, you will need to evaluate your sources. We've already refined our thesis statement and collected our data, but now we have to check the sources that we've used for their accuracy, their authenticity, and whether or not they'll be useful for us in the future. Now, when evaluating these sources, we here at Central Penn suggest that you use the CRAAP test. This is a nice, handy acronym. What it really means is that you need to check the currency, the relevance, the authority, the accuracy, and the purpose of those sources. We'll get into more detail on each of those things in just a moment. But keep in mind that all 5 of these aspects are essential when looking at your sources. Currency. What do we mean by currency? Is the information up to date? A general rule of thumb is current information is published within the last 10 years. So if something is created or written in 2004, while it's not the oldest thing you could read, it's generally not considered the most current. So look for something a bit newer. Something published in the last 5 years is best. You can always check the publication date of good sources. So if you can't find a date, you should be questioning where you're getting your information. In addition to when the actual work was published, you want to look at what other sources they are looking at themselves and when those sources are published. If you're looking at a source that only uses research from the 40s or 50s, however, that is not a good source. You can't rely on their conclusions based on the evidence that they are using. Next, you want to look at the relevance of your source. Does the information relate to your topic? If you're writing a paper about online courses, you're not going to look at sources that look at in-classroom courses unless you're specifically using that to argue against your main point. But you're not going to look at studies that look at how students relate to a professor if that's not speaking about online courses. Do you know the intended audience? That's an important question. Is it an article written for academics? Is it written for experts in the field? Is it written for the general public? These are all important questions that affect the way a source is written and presented. Next, is it written at an appropriate level? If the intended audience is supposed to be the general public, the article itself shouldn't have excessive jargon. On the other side, if it is written for an audience of experts or academics, you want the language to be a bit more sophisticated. Next, have you looked at a variety of sources before deciding? This is a question for you less than the actual source itself, but you don't want to just use the first source you come across. While that might be easiest, it does not necessarily give you the best sources. And finally, a good rule of thumb to ask is, would you use this source in a report for an employer? If you wouldn't show it to your boss, if you wouldn't expect your boss to take it seriously, you probably shouldn't use it in your essay. Next, authority. Is the information credible? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, well, how would I know if it's credible? Well, there are some quick, easy ways to figure it out. First, is there contact information for the author, for the publisher, or is there an email address at the very minimum provided? This is important when you're looking at blog posts, which are not the most credible. If there's no author, you kind of generally know it's not something you should use. If there is an author, then you can look into the author. Are there credentials or affiliations given? If it's a highly respected researcher writing a blog post, that's something you would probably trust a lot more than, Jane Doe on the street. Is the publisher, source, and sponsor given? This is very important, especially when looking at researchers. Is it published by a well-known publisher? Is it some kind of fringe publisher with an ulterior bias and motive? These are questions that are important. Are the credentials and affiliations given? Not just on a quick Google search, which is important, but does the source itself tell you what their credentials and affiliations are? And if they don't, can you find those credentials easily? If you plug in the author's name, the first 5 search results that come up, can you find their credentials? Where do they work? If they are a professor or a researcher, where are they working? If they're a scientist, what company, what lab are they working for? These things should be able to come up quickly. Finally, is the author qualified to write on the topic? This is an important one. Let's say you have an article on the migration habits of bees, and the author is a medical doctor who has studied surgery and neuroscience. Very highly credentialed author, right? But they're not necessarily qualified to write on the migratory habits of bees. So you want to make sure the author's credentials meet the topic, and that they're qualified and they are a subject expert on the subject they are writing on. Next, accuracy. Is the information accurate? Don't just assume that what you're reading is true. We've talked about this with evaluating news sources, right? This goes for all kinds of sources. Has the information been reviewed or refereed? If you're looking at articles, the best possible article you can look at is from a peer-reviewed journal. These are things that you'll find through the library databases. This means that the article has been not only written by a subject expert, but that has been reviewed by a panel of its peers. Usually 2, 3, sometimes 4 other experts will read through the article, look at it for accuracy of information, give recommendations on revision, and help that article make it to its most publishable point. Is the information supported by evidence? You don't want to have an article that makes these unsupported claims without any evidence to back it up. If it's an online article that you're reading, if there are not hyperlinks that show where the source, where it's getting its information from, and if you can't verify that information, then it's probably not a good source to use. Going back to our migratory habits of bees, if this author had said, bees are dying because of cell phone use, you want to see that there is evidence that cell phones are killing bees. You can't just trust their claim. Then, can you verify? Can you find where they've got their information? Do they have a reference list? Do they have works cited? Do they hyperlink to other articles? This is very important. And then, are those sources that they are using trusted and credible? If they're using things from InfoWars or Occupy Democrats, for instance, we know from the infographic those are not necessarily trusted. Finally, and this is the easiest step to check, is it free of spelling, grammatical, or other typographical errors? This is important because nothing that is reviewed, refereed, can pass this test and still get through. So if it does have these kind of errors, you know it's probably not the greatest information to use. Finally, purpose. Does the information have a stated intention? Most do, so you need to find out what is that purpose, and is it impartial, is it free of bias? Does the author make his or her intention clear? Do they state up front what their intention is? That is important. They should. Does their point of view appear objective and impartial? Everybody has bias. It's impossible to get around our biases, but we can leave them aside and present our information as objectively and impartially as we can, and that is what we are striving for. We want to find a source that, yes, they may have a personal bias, but that bias does not bleed through into their writing. You want to see something that appears objective, appears impartial, and it will do so through the use of language. Unbiased, free of emotion. It does not appeal overly to pathos, which means to appeal to your emotions. You're not trying to make the reader cry in order to come onto your side. It's free of any kind of heavy-handed argumentative styles. Every claim that is made is supported by evidence. You can see how these aspects of the CRAAP test work hand in hand. If there is no evidence, then the claims are probably a little too heavy-handed and not objective and impartial. So let's apply the CRAAP test to a sample source. I want you to take a moment and pause the video. Take a look at this, go through the CRAAP test, go through each of the steps, and see what you find. Would you say this is a good source to use? Okay, first, currency. When was this published? Is it current? April 6, 2016. That was a year ago. I'd say it's pretty current, probably pretty good. It even goes so far as to say the exact time it was published. Next, the advantages of doing research in teams. It's an essay. You know the title, you know the purpose. The purpose is told immediately in the title of the essay. That is very important. You also know the type of writing that this is. This is not a blog post. This is not an opinion piece. It is an essay. Next, the source. Inside Higher Ed. It gives you the website. It gives you the full name of the source. This is an industry source for academics in higher ed, academics and researchers. It is a well-trusted source, though it itself is not a peer-reviewed journal. We know the author name, Ben Schneiderman. That is great. We could do a quick Google search of him if we wanted, but luckily for us, it gives us a nice bio. We see his credentials. We see his authority right there in front of us. He's a distinguished university professor. Distinguished, that's pretty good, right? In the Department of Computer Science and the founding director of the Computer Interactive Laboratory at the University of Maryland. So we see that the idea of research, specifically with computer technology, is what he is most credentialed at. This article, this essay that we are reading, while Inside Higher Ed may not be peer-reviewed, was originally published in a book by Oxford University Press, which is one of the premier university presses, so we can verify that it is a good source. He has been well vetted. The research itself has been well vetted. Finally, while the essay's title gives us its purpose, we also want to look in the body of the essay itself. He states researchers are moving strongly and clearly in favor of teamwork. This is good. This is strong language. It tells us exactly what his purpose is, and it also supports it with evidence. He doesn't just make this claim and leave it there. He shows us that as the 1947 invention of the transistor, we have teamwork and group work that is being ascended. So we see that he's not just stating his claims, he is supporting them with evidence. Now, do you have any questions on how the CRAAP test is used? As you're working on the worksheet this week, please feel free to email me or post on the discussion board any questions you have on either the test itself or how to apply it, or if you have a specific source you're looking at and you're not sure how something is working with that source, you may feel free to ask.